The number one problem of the world is confusion. There is such choice in every single area, and this has been multiplied by 20 or 100 since internet came into being. And it is very difficult to make your own choice. It's so easy to get lost in this supermarket, amongst others, of spiritual offers. And that's why I think I would suggest that people learn to go into the silence and just listen. And if you really listen and follow your heart, your feeling, not your mind, you will be guided to the right form of spirituality.
Hello and welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Linda Ulrich. If you are listening to this podcast, you're probably one of these people in the world who's positive, upbeat. Maybe people in your circles look to you to be that person who's sort of like the rock who points to possibility in those tough moments. Well, this podcast is going to be for you because we just talk to people about opportunity and possibility and potential. And today we have a wonderful guest, Pierre Pradervand. Pierre is the author of over 20 books. And while I could interview him probably every week for 2024 and we'd never run out of insight. But today we're going to talk about his book called The Gentle Art of Spiritual Discernment. It is just a life-changing read, very small, 128 pages, but packed full of things that'll give you the answers to questions like, deep down, who am I? And what am I really looking for in sort of a philosophical quest in my life? And what is the deep motivation of this search? Like, why am I searching for meaning and purpose and all those things? I tell you, one of the things about Pierre's background that impressed me is that he has an entire lifetime full of being a helper in the world. He's worked with the UN, countless NGOs. He's lived all over the world. He has a PhD from the Sorbonne in Paris that has served him for a lifetime of serving others. Okay, so I have to talk to you about this word, spiritual discernment, because I don't know, most people who listen to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast know that we don't talk about politics or religion very much, if at all. And this book is about the discernment part, and we're going to get into the difference between spirituality and religion, which is fascinating enough right from the start. And here's what drew me in. When I was first contacted about talking to Pierre about this book and his insights, I read the foreword of the book quickly, and that's written by a wonderful man named Dr. Jonathan Ellerby, which some people will know has wound up on stages with folks like Wayne Dyer and Deepak Chopra and Andrew Weil. So this guy really has some spiritual discernment of his own. And he makes a point in the very second paragraph of the book that he actually thought, does the world really need another book on spiritual growth? And then when he read the important insights that Pierre is bringing in this book, he said, yes, this world needs all the teachers, authors, wisdom keepers it can get for the times that we're in. And I believe the same. So we are here to welcome the amazing Pierre Pradervand and thank him for adding still more to being a helper in the world. Thank you, Pierre. Welcome.
It's a joy for me, as you know, a great joy.
So, Pierre, one of the sentences that Dr. Ellerby uses to sort of end his foreword in your book is that spirituality is not about escaping life. It's about removing the barriers to the abundant feelings of love and connection that we are born with. Well, that pretty much says it all. Talk to us about that statement.
Well, that's the difference I make between spirituality and religion. You see, I was brought up in a very strict Presbyterian background. I even studied 2 years theology, and I got many good things from it. But then I broke away, and for many years I wandered on my own. And finally, I've found my own spiritual path outside of any systematic, organized system, because I have discovered that religion, it can be very helpful for many people at a certain stage of evolution, but many get stuck there. And religion, it's more about following certain rules, certain formulas, certain ways of praying, adoring God. Spirituality for me is more a deep personal research into this ground of being, this inner well of infinite goodness that I think is in each person. And I've had some very powerful spiritual experiences in my life, what you would call, in terms of the study of spirituality, truly mystical experiences. And the quality of a mystical experience is that it's totally different from normal knowledge. A mystical experience is a kind of knowledge that totally transcends the mental university type knowledge. It's, well, let me give you an example. I was in Burkina Faso many, many years ago, 30 or 40 years ago, where I was one of the co-founders of what became the largest grassroots peasant network in the whole of Africa. And I attended the General Assembly of this meeting, and the last day I caught dysentery. At the beginning, it's not serious, but it can become so if it's unattended to. And as the last day of the meeting, the last afternoon was free, and at the time I was practicing a form of purely spiritual medicine, not taking any normal medicine, just healing myself spiritually. I worked with my texts, my mantras, my prayers the whole afternoon, and it seemed that the problem had disappeared. But the next day, going to the airport, it started all over again. And on the plane, I was working on this problem with my texts, my mantras, sitting next to an unattended little boy, about, I guess, 8, 9 years old. And the stewardess taking care of him was a real angel. One would have thought she was his mother. She was constantly checking if he was okay. And at one moment, she came to speak to him with a very special tenderness. And suddenly I felt for this woman a gratitude I've never, ever felt before. And it became a cosmic gratitude. And suddenly I had an out-of-body experience. I was no longer in the plane. I was in a space, Linda, where there was only the presence, the feeling of infinite love. Love was the only cause, the only effect, the only law, the only power, the only truth, the only healing energy that could exist. And the most wonderful thing, Pierre Pradervand had completely disappeared. I had no sense whatsoever of having a personal ego. Just the divine consciousness of love was, for an indeterminate period, because I was out of time, it was my consciousness. And I felt love as the basic structure and reality of the whole universe. And suddenly I was back in my seat in the airplane. In a matter of seconds, the dysentery had disappeared. And above all, I'd had one of the three most powerful experiences of my lifetime. And that is the source of the basis of my spirituality, is this understanding that there are laws of infinite love which uphold the universe and every single person.
Okay, so this is the reason why I wanted to talk to Pierre. In our society, there's a lot of kinds of biases. And one of them that I've noticed, Pierre, is the bias on age. And,
Yes.
talking to someone like you is it shows that bias about age is completely ridiculous and non-useful. And we have got to listen to folks who have lived experiences that might inform our journeys.
Yeah, and I'm 86, I'm still totally lively and working 100%. And I get up at 5:30 in the morning, go to bed around 10:30 in the evening, and I have a full day every single day.
And I understand your wife is about the same
Oh,
at it.
she's still 10 times more incredible than I. She's the person I admire most in the world. She runs her own foundation, Women's World Summit Foundation from Geneva, and she's been running it for over 30 years without the slightest salary. And it's this foundation has had in certain areas a world impact. And for instance, she created something totally original with the most neglected women in the world, the peasant women farmers of the third world. Over 30 years ago, she created a prize for the creativity of rural women that's been given to almost 500 leading grassroots women in the third world, and one or two in the north, but nearly all in the third world, in something I don't know, like 120 countries. It's just amazing. And for these women who are totally unknown, suddenly
and would still be that way were it not for, how old is your wife?
my wife is 85 and she's 84, and she's still much more energetic than me.
Wow.
And she works at least 55 hours a week. Very often she works the whole Sunday. She's so passionate about what she's doing. So she's just launched a world campaign called 75%, because she's the first person, and I can't believe that almost, as I work, in the United Nations Statistical Division of the WHO, World Health Organization. Nobody had ever calculated before that women, the young, and children constitute 75% of the world's population and have nothing to say practically running this planet. 6 out of 8 billion have almost nothing to say. And
well, they probably have something to say, but no one's listening.
Of course, they have such a lot to say.
Yes.
And huge amount to say. For instance, I'm sure they wouldn't agree with the $5 billion spent daily on armament and weapons. This is one of the greatest scandals in a world where 800 million people go to bed hungry every evening. But we won't get onto that topic. Okay, let's come back to
what you're giving us today is a lifetime's worth of lived experience and perspectives that rest on that lived experience. And that's something none of us can come up with. If we're 29, 33, 53, or 63, we haven't run into everything yet. And you have run into so much that I want to plumb the depths of this and that topic. Okay, here we go. I love this concept of unconventional spirituality. One of the things you talk a lot about, and you intimated it when you first started speaking with us today, is that it's important to find your own way. I came across this statistic that kind of blew me away. It's that 70% of Americans think of themselves as spiritual, or say that spirituality has an important part in their life. But a large part of those people, 30%, say they are not religious. So I love your way of encouraging us to just find our own way in this process. Talk to us about unconventional spirituality and how we can just live our busy lives.
Once you get off the beaten path, you have to create your own path. This is what I had to do for myself. I studied a variety of forms of religion, and I lived 12 years in Muslim countries. And so I've been exposed to different religious influences, but they tend to, let's say, encourage a bit the sheep mentality, whereas we need people who are today independent thinkers, thinking for themselves. So I would encourage people to study various religious traditions. You'll find excellent things in almost all of them, but then make your own mix. Create a spirituality that is meaningful for you. One that has helped me immensely in this respect is the American mystic Joel Goldsmith. Joel Goldsmith lived in the last century, and he created a spirituality he called the infinite way, and he lectured all around the planet. And what was important with Joel, I must explain that 90% of forms of spirituality and religion are dualistic. Everything goes by two: good, bad, the devil, the angel, God, man, heaven, hell. In the dualism, in the non-dualist vision, everything is the divine expressing itself. And that drunkard yelling in the street is God expressing himself in a way that has been completely hidden, but it is for me to discover the divine in him and help him discover the divine in himself. And that's where the practice of blessing, the gentle art of blessing, has for me completely changed my life. I discovered this over 30 years ago. I received a text. I can really say I received this text. I was like a scribe under orders. That's a little over 30 years ago. I was studying quietly, and suddenly I received this text, and I was literally, my pen could hardly follow the flow of words that came to me, and I started sharing this text on the gentle art of blessing, and it started going around the whole world, and I started receiving translations into foreign languages by people left and right. And I know it has helped so many people and has resolved so many problems. And by blessing, I mean wanting the real good for the other person from your heart. And it heals. I mean, if you go on the website, gentleartofblessing.org, all linked together, gentleartofblessing.org. It's a bilingual site, English and French. You will find some amazing testimonies of the power of blessing, sometimes to change situations instantaneously.
One of the stories that I would love for you to tell is how, some of us have such busy lives, like we barely have time to turn around. We've got single mothers that are trying to juggle work and kids and households and so forth. But you've got this great story about unconventional spirituality, about finding your own way, that relates to a man named Brother Lawrence, who just found a way to be in the world, and that was a practice itself.
Brother Lawrence was a very modest cook, a friar, a brother, in a convent in Paris. I think it was a late 16th, early 17th century. And his kitchen had become a chapel, in the sense that he was so full, so conscious of the presence of God in that kitchen. He made that kitchen his shrine, his temple, his church. And he became a confessor to famous people in Paris at that time. And he had no special degrees of any sort whatsoever, except that of loving the presence of God and living in this constant presence. So I've started writing a book in French. I don't know if it'll come out in English, called A Spirituality for People in a Hurry. Now, I'm sure that many spiritual people would laugh at me. Pierre, how can you write a book on this theme? I'm not thinking of them. I'm thinking of working mothers who work full time, raising 2 kids, and their husband has run away with someone else. And they can imagine, well, I don't have a minute for spirituality. But spirituality is something you live every single minute. I'll give you the example of blessing, which is the one I practice most. I don't have a car. I go by public transport, and I love blessing people in the tram or the bus. I look at them and I say mentally, of course, not out loud, I really love you, and I bless you in your divine perfection. I started at the beginning, I started just saying, I love you and bless you in your divine perfection, mentally, of course. And then I introduced the word really love you. And that changed everything, Linda. It was amazing. It took such a greater depth, that simple affirmation. And a mother, cooking the meal, can give thanks that she has carrots and potatoes and a nice fish to prepare for her children. Gratitude is an essential aspect of any authentic spirituality. So spirituality is not something you have to practice in a recluse spot in the Alps or the mountains. It is something that you practice wherever you are. For instance, I love blessing people in the street or the tram or whatever, the metro, who are especially despondent, who look sad, depressed, because I know they need some support. Mm-hmm. And I believe that blessing can bring it to them, unbeknownst of themselves.
So what you're talking about is thinking a thought. Like since you and I had our first pre-call, I've been trying this. Oh, if you're involved in your local community, there'll always be sort of antagonists, folks that you think are taking the community in the wrong way. Or, when you watch the news, you see folks that feel like chaos builders instead of helpers. So I've been trying to say, in my mind, I, bless you. I hope the best for you. I want you to feel more peace. I try and say, is that what you're talking about when you say blessing someone?
Yes, but it's not. It can be so varied. About a year, just at the start of the Ukraine war, I was in my room in the early morning in my silent time, and I received an order. It never happened to me before in my life. Love Putin.
Oh,
Now, I can't say that at that moment I loved him particularly, but after 2 weeks of spiritual work, I really got to the point where when I spoke to him in French, I could say tu, which is the familiar tense, and feel he was a brother. And I even wrote a blog on this and had a fantastic response because people were looking for something different to do than just condemn, condemn, condemn.
yes.
I continue mentally speaking to him as my brother and feeling authentic love for this man.
Okay. So if you can do that, we can do it with the folks that are driving us a little crazy in our life, or the folks that we run into in the day that make the hair stand on the back of our neck. I will refer people to that blog post. It's called Tolerance in a World of Constant Contrast. So I will include that on the article on the Goodness Exchange. You won't find these kind of details on Spotify or Apple or all that. But if you go to the Goodness Exchange, you're going to get all the links that Pierre and I are talking about. Okay, so that is something you call divine love.
Yes, of course.
Like where you can bring this place inside you. Back to the quote that we started with in the conversation here, that it's a feeling of love and connection that we're born with. Talk to us about this wonderful man that you have had a lot of insight from in your life. What is his name? Roger?
Roger McGowan, the death row inmate.
Yeah. Yes. Talk to us about Roger's story.
In 1996, I heard about this gentleman from a lady in Zurich. He was an Afro-American death row inmate, and he just received a date for his execution. And he wrote to this woman. She was one of his rare correspondents, and she just couldn't accept this would be true. And she started contacting people. And someone in Zurich, a banker friend of hers, told her, "Oh, you must contact Pierre Pradervand in Geneva." And for me, this is divine intervention. So I'd never had anything to do with death row whatsoever. But she told me his story, and it was so moving because he was wrongly incarcerated. It's absolutely for a crime someone else had committed. But as he was a poor black man, he had no money of his. He certainly couldn't hire a lawyer. So he was given a state-appointed lawyer who never visited him before the trial of his client, who was a known drunkard, who prepared the plea for his client on the basis of the police report condemning my friend, and fell asleep snoring all through the trial of this gentleman, Roger. And so Roger, of course, was condemned to death. And I started visiting him in 97. And it was just extraordinary. I met a man of such qualities, such distinction, such elevated spiritual thought. And we started corresponding regularly. And I hired a new lawyer. I'd created an international support group. And after 6 years and over $300,000, this lawyer managed to get him off death row. And now he's been since 98 in another prison where he is revolutioning the culture of this prison. He's transforming the culture of a prison win unit in Houston, Texas, in a way that is just unbelievable. And I've written 3 books on this man, and he has touched people all around the world. For instance, I received a letter from a gentleman who was prisoner in Thailand, the Bang Kwang Central Prison, which is the worst prison in Thailand. And he discovered Roger's book, the book I'd written on Roger, in the bookstore of the prison.
What's the name of that book?
The library of the prison. Now, tell me, how did that book in French reach that library in Thailand, where they had books essentially in Thai and in English? I call that divine intervention.
Okay.
And this book transformed this inmate who'd been right at the bottom of a deep pit of depression. And to make a long story short, I spoke about him in a meeting where there was a very wealthy lady who took his case up, even hired a lawyer in Thailand. And to make a long story short, he's now out of prison and back in his home in Cameroon. So Roger has had a huge impact.
Yeah.
He continues having this impact.
Well, the story of Roger reminds us of something. Well, we have to take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to share with our audience something that I've thought about almost every day since I first spoke to you. So let's take a break. You know how the constant negative noise in our digital lives feels like it's reaching a boiling point? Now, many of us have tuned out the news and social media almost entirely. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. There are newsworthy stories about amazing progress, innovation, leaps in human potential, and wonders in the natural world, and they're just not reaching the top of our feeds. We can have access to this, but none of us has the time or maybe even the emotional stamina to search through all the doom and gloom news to find what's right with the world. Okay, enter the Goodness Exchange. There, we are giving instant access to positive news for curious people. Did you hear about the recent Harvard study that found that exposure to just 4 minutes of good news can make you 32% less anxious and 18% more optimistic? Well, I don't know about you, but I need those kind of numbers in my life. So, if you want to live with more joy and way less fear, it's really simple. First, you join us at the Goodness Exchange. Everyone around the world has the opportunity to access this kind of content. And we've promised no politics for about a decade, so you're safe from all that distraction as well. Second, you allow this new, more positive, balanced worldview to put a spring in your step again. It can change the way you react to your kids, your coworkers, everybody you come in contact with. And the stories we write about can make you the idea person in your circles. These challenging times call for us to wake up and take control of our perspective. The people who use the Goodness Exchange have the ability to react to the harshness of the world much different because they know way more about what's right with the world. And that's a resource. So subscribe to the Goodness Exchange, our YouTube channel and the podcast, and use this content to live a more expansive worldview. It is still an amazing world out there, and you can be a part of it. Welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness. Okay, we're back. And I have to share with our audience something that you shared with me that I've thought about dozens of times since we first talked. You shared with me that in our efforts to stop judging, because that's kind of where all this starts, these ill feelings about others and the world around us and so forth, you reminded me that everyone is at their highest level of consciousness right now.
Exactly.
And that's it. And really, if I have trouble with that or them or their behavior, that's my problem.
Exactly, Linda.
Right? Like it's my expectations for how they should be acting or what they should be saying that get me in trouble, that give me the bad feelings, right?
Exactly. And you can apply this to anyone, including, for many years, my favorite ghost, if I can say, was Mr. Trump. And now I can say I've learned to even love this gentleman because he is too at his highest level of consciousness at this moment.
Mm-hmm. And then it comes to something that I absolutely adore as kind of a fallback position when I think about my relationship to the world and the people I meet every day, and some that leave me disappointed, some that leave me joyful. There is no private paradise, you say.
No.
It's really about looking for win-win solutions and pathways and philosophies. Like, talk to us about this way of being in the world that we can live with the negative news and the negative noise.
Well, I believe that there is a law of good, an infinite providence governing all things in the universe. And even what appears as bad is part of an educational path that we have to learn. As a humanity, we are going to have to learn that there is no solution through war. There is no solution in social injustice. For instance, 25 richest people on the planet have as much income as half the world's population. Well, that's not normal. That's something sick. And such situations will have to disappear. So I believe that there's a law of harmony behind everything. And occasionally, we see this providence functioning in an amazing way. Could I share my favorite story about providence?
Absolutely.
As you might know, I lived many years in Africa, and in the 70s, 80s, people in Europe had a very, very negative image of Africa. And I wanted to help correct this image because I'd been working with grassroots peasant groups in the Sahel and knew that amazing things were happening, quite amazing things at the grassroots, but no journalist would ever go and interview these people. So I took upon myself, I made a 14,000 kilometer trip through over 1,300 villages, talked to well over 1,000 peasant farmers, women and men, either individually or in groups, and published a book in English called Listening to Africa. In French, it's called Une Afrique Marche. And this was an amazing trip. And at one of the general assemblies of the grassroots peasant organization, and one gentleman from Mali, a peasant leader in a totally remote area of the country, said, Pierre, you have to come visit me and my farmers. And I really like this man. And though it was very difficult to get there, I said, I will come. And he told me, you have to tell the engine driver to stop at such and such a place. There is a straw hut, which is called a station, and I will be there with my friend to meet you, but you must send me a telegram a week in advance. And so I told the engine driver in Bamako, can you stop at such and such a place? And he seemed to know where it was. And he said, yes, I'll stop there. And it was an international train. I thought there would be food and drinks, but there was absolutely nothing. And it was already getting very, very hot. It was the late spring. And I got onto my train, and all the way along I was worrying, will he stop there? Will he stop there? And at one moment, the engine came to a grinding halt, and it was the right place. And my friend was in the little straw hut with a friend of his, but he had not received my telegram. Now, I call that Providence, because if he hadn't been there, I would have got off lost in the boondocks of Africa. The only thing I could have thought of doing was walking along the train line to the station 25 miles further. But even if I'd dropped my huge rucksack, I would have been eaten up by the hyenas at nighttime, long before reaching the station. So that's what I call Providence. And I think of this incident so often, because if I'm speaking to you today, it's because some cosmic law energy wanted me to speak to you, and so arranged that the train stop at that place.
And I would imagine that if people sit quietly after listening to this interview, or just let it play around in their back of their mind, over time, they will think of times of providence that we often call coincidence,
Yes,
that we say, oh, everything happens for a reason. We say these things, but what we're really talking about is this aptitude for providence when
exactly.
you are on a path that feels like it's your light that you're following. You know, one of the things you say, and I think it's relevant to the story you just told, is be guided by love. It will make you fearless. This is a real simple but profound thing. Last night, I was at a local zoning board meeting, and I'm unhappy with some things that are happening with local development that kind of feel like they're going against our town rules. And I'm sitting there sort of gnashing my teeth, and I don't like conflict. I just don't like conflict. My husband and I are from a little farming town in Illinois, and people here in the Northeast where I've lived for 30 years, they're comfortable with conflict, but we just aren't. And I was feeling like I didn't want to speak up at this meeting. And I thought of that. I thought of that statement. I said to myself, be guided by love, and you will feel fearless. And so I did. I made myself, love this community. I thought to myself about the love I have for all these people on these boards that are giving their time, and the love of all the community members who are showing up and putting in. And it made me fearless. And I did speak up and say something that was relevant to the dialogue. And so I think that what you're talking to us about is finding this inner light that we can be guided by in a supermarket of spirituality. Right? I mean, this is the problem. Sometimes we aren't willing to listen to our own inner light, and there seems to be this kind of crazy spirituality supermarket on the internet. Talk to us about the difference between finding our own light or following it, and trying to avoid the confusion and the.
You just said the word confusion.
Okay.
Byron Katie, who is one of the leading figures in the United States in the field of development education, personal education. She organized workshops all around the place. She's one of my stars, a woman who inspired me immensely, Byron Katie.
Yeah.
And
I'll put a note and a link in the
she
show
once
notes
said
about this.
in a meeting I attended, the number one problem of the world is confusion. And I so agree with that. And we live in a world, there is such choice in every single area. And this has been multiplied by 20 or 100 since internet came into being. And it is very difficult to make your own choice. It's so easy to get lost in this supermarket, amongst others, of spiritual offers. And that's why I think I would suggest that people learn to go into the silence. I love the Quakers for that. I occasionally attend the Quaker meeting in Geneva because the people just sit there in silence for an hour. Occasionally someone might get up and share a few inspired words, but if not, the rest of the time, it's just silence. Well, have your Quaker meeting inside yourself and just listen. And if you really listen and follow your heart, your feeling, not your mind, you will be guided to the right form of spirituality. This, of course, implies also reading different kinds of spirituality, Indian, Far Eastern Indian, Latin American, you name it. There are so many. But if you are sincere, for me, that is the key issue. Mrs. Eddy, who is a great spiritual thinker of the 19th century in the States, she said, a deep sincerity is sure of success, for God takes care of it. And that statement has guided me my whole life. I believe so much, well, my whole life, let's say the last 40 years, I believe so much that we will be guided if we are deeply sincere.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the message I would like to share with readers of your program. If they are deeply sincere, they will be guided to the right path for them.
But Pierre, there's this mental chatter that's going on in our heads at all times. I don't know if there is silence in here for most of us. There's this, the internet is constantly gobbling up our attention, and outside forces are constantly messing with our inner guide or our self-confidence about our inner guide. How do we choose who to give our attention to these days?
Well, I start my quiet moment every morning. I take about an hour and a half to prepare myself spiritually for the day. And I always start by a moment of silence. And I say something like, Here I am, divine love, listening to thee. And then I shut up and I listen. Here I am, listening to thee. And then I really, really, really listen.
And you don't have this constant din of mental chatter that's shaped by the daily news or social media or what have you. You
Sometimes I do, yes. I have that like anyone else, but with perseverance, if you really are sincere, and if you persevere every day, not time to time when you feel like it, every day, you will reach that deep inner silence.
This level of thought right here where we're at reminds me of this great little story that also has stuck with me about the tiny frog in the well.
Okay, there's a Japanese proverb that says it's very difficult to describe the vast horizons of the ocean to the frog sitting at the bottom of his well. Now, I'll give you the occasion when this came to me. At one time, I was on a very rigid spiritual path, which claimed to be the highest spiritual teaching on earth, which is very dangerous. And at that time, I was living in Dakar, Senegal, and I was living between two shanty towns on the beach. I had a little bungalow there were 3, 4 bungalows, and then a shanty town on each side of us. And very early, I started a discussion group with a few of the boys of one of the shanty towns. And one of them was the son of the local Muslim imam. And this gentleman was a very kind, gentle person. And occasionally I would go and talk to him. And one Sunday afternoon, I thought, I'm going to ask Imam Sal how Islam defines God, because I was so sure that I had the best definition in the world, because it was the definition of the spiritual path at that time. And I strode along the beach, and my mind was that of the little frog sitting at the bottom of his well. And I reached the home of Imam Sal. I said the usual greetings, and then I said, Imam Sal, I have come to ask you how Islam defines God. And the reply he gave me just annihilated the poor little frog at the bottom of his well. He said, my dear Pierre, with his gentle voice, if you took all the branches of all the trees in the whole planet and the water of all the oceans and lakes and rivers and streams as ink, and the branches of the trees as pens, you could not write out all the names of God. In other words, God was undefinable. And boy, Linda, the little frog in me was deflated once and for all. But then he added, and you know, Pierre, you are a better Muslim than most of the Muslims who surround me. By that he meant I didn't run after women, whereas most of the Frenchmen and Swiss and foreigners working in Senegal at that time, if they were young, they had cohorts of young, black, attractive women running after them. I didn't drink, whereas most Europeans drank heavily. And I didn't swear, and I kept my word, which are all commandments of Islam. So he said, you know, Pierre, you are a better Muslim than most of the Muslims that surround me. I had closed him out and he had enclosed me in. There's a lovely little poem by an American poet, I've forgotten the name. He drew a circle that closed me out. Heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. Love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that closed him in. And Imam Saab drew the larger circle around me. I've never forgotten that lesson, which is, at least 50 years old, 50 years ago in my life. Do you understand why I was so impressed?
Share with us.
Well, I was impressed because I'd closed him out with my narrowness and I just earned my PhD and I was so full of intellectual pride.
Yep.
And he gently enclosed me in with his kindness and his love.
You know, it's a ripening process. What if we thought of our own growth, not in a judgmental way, because we judge ourselves as well as we judge others, right?
Yes.
What if we thought of the whole thing as a ripening process?
I love that.
I love green tomatoes. There's a way I cook them, a southern way that you fry green tomatoes. Have you ever had fried green tomatoes, Pierre?
No.
Okay, well, sometime I'm going to cook you fried green tomatoes. Well, my point is that there's goodness at that stage of a ripening tomato in the green stage, and there's goodness in the full fruit at the very top of its game. But it's all a ripening process. What if we cut ourselves and others some slack and just thought of it as a ripening process?
Lovely. Lovely.
Okay, so I want to ask you a few more things before we wrap up. My question to you is, how do we know who to trust these days? I get this question from young people
How
all
do
the
we
time.
know?
How do we
How do
know who to trust with our attention being grabbed by so many people saying they have the way, they know the way? You know, you were probably sitting at the well thinking when you were the little frog, you thought you knew the way. You have this great little thing you said that I've also thought about a few times. You ask yourself, what interest is he or she defending? And sometimes we are defending our own interest when we don't realize we're the little frog at the bottom of the well. Talk to us about this. How do we know who to trust?
That's a very good question. I would say first and last, follow your heart. If you listen, really listen, your heart, not your mind, will tell you this person has something valuable to share with you or not.
Right.
But you must learn to practice silence in you. And that is one of that's the most important thing I would like to leave to listeners of this program, is really learn to establish this deep silence inside you. It is so healing in the clutter and noise and advertising of this rather crazy society to be able to establish a deep peace inside you and just rest there.
Okay, we have to sort of wrap up by showing people the book. It's a beautiful book, absolutely. Little tiny thing. I've annotated. You can you can see how much I annotated in this book, Pierre. I kept marking things and saying, I have to ask that. I need to know more about that. So this is the book you want. It's a nice little thing you can annotate in and refer back to. This is about discernment, about in this world of noise and people trying to gobble up our attention. This is about being discerning about what we give our attention to. It's not about religion. It's about how we find our way. Okay, so to wrap up today, I want to ask you about something I found in the book that I really have thought about a lot. In the book, you say, just listen and ask, what should I do with the gift of these few minutes? I love that question. When we're standing in the grocery store line, when we're waiting for our kids' soccer practice to be over, when we're sitting in a public meeting that we're bored stiff at, what should I do with the gift of these few minutes? Talk to
Exactly.
us about those
Well,
choices.
it is such an individual thing. Okay. Now I have taken the habit. I no longer ask the question because I've so taken the habit of blessing people that I don't feel I need to ask the question anymore. Blessing is a second nature for me. And I can really say, Linda, that I do not judge one person on this planet because it's so clear to me that each one is at every minute at his or her highest level of consciousness.
We got to make new practices in the new year. We're recording this episode today. It's December 19th, 2023. So we have a few weeks left of 2023, which was a hard year for the world. It's a hard, we know we got some strife coming up, and I really want folks to give this episode some thought when we try to think of how we're going to put 2023 in a place that we can live with it. And when we go forward in 2024, I know I'm going to think of so many of these insights. And when I have time, I am going to think, what should I do with the gift of these few moments? Thank you, Pierre Pradervand.
You,
I
Linda.
know we'll have more conversations. I still have questions that we didn't get to. Thank you so much for joining us. Tell folks again what they can do next. What is the name of the website to check out?
gentleartofblessing.org.
Okay. And then everything else we mentioned, including some things we didn't get to, is going to be listed in the show notes for this episode on the Goodness Exchange in an article. All you have to do is put Pierre's name in the search box and you will find a direct link to so much goodness. So thank you for joining us on the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast, everyone. I hope that the insights we shared today help you keep a spring in your step and go forward and find what you are uniquely built to contribute, because there's this whole world of you in there that I think Pierre is pointing to and helping us find that can help us live lives of wonder and joy. Thank you, Pierre
Thank you,
Pradervand.
Linda. It was a great joy talking with you.
All right.
Really.
So
Good night.
great. Have a great, great day. Thank you.
Bless you all from the bottom of my heart.